Join the coven. Night Shift in a Care Home. A story written by BeardedBamboozle. I recently found some Let's Read type channels on YouTube and decided to try and write down an experience I had a few years ago, as it seems similar to the content being posted. I'm 27 years old, male, live in the UK with my fiance, and currently work as a teaching assistant for teenagers with special educational needs in a school not far from Bradgate Park in Leicestershire. I have worked in a number of schools and children's homes. Now these buildings, especially the children's homes, are usually old, renovated houses or halls. This particular story happened in 2013, when I had just started working as a support worker at a care home for teenagers and young adults, 18 to 30 years old, with autism, brain damage, and challenging behavior. The house that I worked in was pretty big. There were 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a games room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. There was also a huge garden with a summer house / activity room that led on to acres of fields and woodland. I had been working there for about 3 weeks and primarily worked with the walking night shift. This shift ran from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m. and it was my duty to make sure all of the residents were settled for the night and to get the cleaning done before the day staff came in to take over. I would usually get all my jobs done for around 1 a.m. and spend the rest of the night listening out for anyone that woke up. I will watch TV, read my university course books, or sometimes just play games on my phone. Once I was finished, the residents usually slept all night. On one particular night, a young man named James, not the actual name for legal reasons, was particularly restless. He was not very big, but he had a lot of strength behind him. When he got into one of his bad moods, and the slightest thing could set him off, he once threw a member of staff through a patio door because she had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before he drank it. He could not form full sentences, and would communicate with fairly simple words put together in a way that he understood. For example, he would say something like, "James, make breakfast," when he was ready to make breakfast, or "James, go outside," if he wanted to go outside and play. He was generally well behaved, and could be quite funny when he wanted to be, but was well known for his temper. At around 11 p.m., James got up and came downstairs to make a drink. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself, and he went back upstairs without any real bother. I sat on the top step and kept an eye on his door for maybe 15 minutes or so, to make sure he didn't wake up any of the other residents. Once he had settled, I went back to my cleaning. The room beneath James's bedroom was a communal living room with board games, a TV, sofas, books, and stuff like that. I was in there dusting and mopping the floor when I heard something heavy drop onto the floor in the room above. I knew James was prone to temper tantrums if he got frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on his door. As I reached for the key to open it myself, he opened the door and looked at me. He seemed perfectly calm, and his eyes looked almost half shut, like he had just been asleep. I asked if he was okay, and he said yes, and put his thumb up. That was something he did when he was in a good mood and not stressed out. So I left him to it, and told him to be careful, thinking that he had knocked something over. An hour or so passed, and by now I was in the kitchen cleaning the sink. I heard another bang above me, again like something had been dropped. This time I realized that the room above the kitchen was currently empty. The house was set up to house 5 residents, but there were only currently 4, and the room above me was the spare empty room. I immediately went to check it out, but the room was empty. I stood there for a while, and, as far as I could tell, everyone was asleep. Due to the nature of their conditions and behaviors, each resident has an alarm fitted to their door that is activated at night. So if anyone leaves their room, a small receiver box that the night staff carry around makes a noise, and a light blinks for a few seconds to indicate which door has been opened, numbered 1 to 5. The alarm had not gone off, so I knew that the noise was not from any of the residents. I got back to my cleaning and didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The following night, I got to work just before 10, and as I entered the hallway, I could tell that something was wrong. James was at the bottom of the stairs, covering his ears and humming loudly, and 3 members of staff were with him. After a few minutes, he was escorted to the sitting room, and the house manager gave me a rundown of what had been going on. For the last 4 hours, James had been quite agitated and kept repeating the phrase, "Sarah, little girl," when asked what was wrong. This was something we had never experienced with him before, and the general conclusion was that he had seen something on TV or in a movie that stuck in his head and made him repeat the phrase. Once James had been settled into bed, the night staff left, and the other member of staff that was sleeping in went up to the staff bedroom. I got on with my tasks as usual, finished around 1 a.m. Soon after this, I went upstairs to do a quick check on all the residents. But as I got onto the first floor landing, I noticed the light had been turned off. There were 2 small corridors leading to the bedrooms on the left and right-hand sides of the staircase. James's room was on the left, and the light switch was just outside his room. I turned the corner to flick the switch, and there, in the darkness and complete silence, was James. He was stood in the corner completely naked, with his eyes as wide as he could possibly hold them. I'm a big guy, 6'3" and weigh about 220. But at that moment, I was really creeped out. I spoke calmly to James and asked what was going on, and for a while, he said nothing at all. Then, as I turned the light back on, he let out an ear-piercing scream and started slapping himself around the face. The sleep-in staff woke up at this point and helped me to calm the situation and get James back into bed before reassuring the other residents that everything was fine. After that night, I had 4 days off. My shift pattern was 7 days on, 2 days off, followed by 8 days on and 4 days off, and I was relieved that this incident had happened just as my time off began. I got back to work the following week and was told that the situation with James talking about the little girl had got a lot worse. He would spend hours staring out the window that overlooked the garden saying, "Little girl, where are you, little girl?" And no one knew where he had heard the phrase. That night around 3 a.m., the alarm went off to say that the door to room 5, the spare room, had been opened. Now, this instantly seemed a bit weird as the door to the spare room is kept locked because it was being used for storage at the time. I went up to investigate and I found James stood in the room in the dark. He didn't seem to notice me entering and was just stood there whispering, "Where are you?" over and over again. I gently touched his shoulder and said something like, "Come on, mate, let's get you back to bed. It's late." James turned around and started heading back to his room, and for a second I was relieved. But then, as I locked the door to the spare room, he screamed out, "Oh no!" and started pummeling the door with both fists. As he did this, the alarm went off to indicate that the front door had been opened. The only people with a key to the front door were myself, as the night wake staff, and the house manager. The door has 4 locks on it, 2 that require a key, and 2 that require electronic ID cards. It was now 3:25 a.m., and the manager never came in before 8 a.m., so I presumed there must have been some kind of mistake, and continued to defuse the situation with James. He finally calmed down and went back into his room, so I went downstairs to check the front door. To my surprise, it was wide open. I shut it immediately and started checking every room in the house in case someone had got in. I then checked on each of the residents to make sure that they were all still in the house. Everything was fine. The next night, everything was calm until around 2 a.m. when one of the other residents, Connor, got up and said there was something tapping on his window. I guess that he must have been dreaming, as his window was on the 3rd floor of the house and was at least 25 feet from the ground. I went back up to his room to reassure him and check his window. Sure enough, it was shut, and the security lock that prevents it from opening wide enough for someone to fit through was still sealed. As he got back in bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside his room. He froze for a second and looked at me with an expression of pure panic on his face. I opened the door to see who it was, but no one was there. He was clearly scared by this and said, "Is he back?" My blood ran cold, and I asked, "Is who back? What do you mean?" Connor looked over my shoulder and then sank down into his bed, pulling his duvet up to his mouth. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but there was still no one there. "Tell him to go away," Connor said in a hushed, scared voice. I tried to reassure him that there was no one there and left his bedside lamp on before leaving the room. I went downstairs and sat outside on the patio with a cup of coffee. It was the middle of January and around -2 outside, but I felt like I had to get out of the house for a while. After about 40 minutes, I went back inside and washed my cup in the sink, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard. Beneath the cupboard was a locked, secured drawer where all of the sharp knives are kept until needed. The drawer was open slightly. This was obviously a major issue, as none of the residents were allowed access to the knife drawer without supervision. I counted the knives and realized that there was one missing. So I woke the sleep-in staff, told her the situation, and we began a search. Nearly 2 hours later, we still hadn't found the missing knife, so decided to just keep our guard up and make sure none of the residents were hiding it. 2 hours later, at 5:30 a.m., the alarm sounded. It was the door to the spare room again. I went up to check it out and found that the door was locked. How could the alarm have been activated by the door opening if the door was still locked? I went inside and turned the light on. To this day, I still have no explanation for what I found, and I often think about this incident. The bed had been pushed from its usual place and was against the wall, and the wardrobe doors were open. There were screws and nails all over the floor, but nothing was broken. But the most disturbing part, in the middle of the room, there was a children's doll, a gold bracelet, and the missing knife from the kitchen. The doll was an old-style baby doll. My guess was that it was made in the 50s, from the style of the clothes and the overall look of the doll. The bracelet was simple, but old-looking. I left everything as it was and reported it to the manager as soon as she arrived. No one ever claimed that the bracelet belonged to them, and it was taken to a charity shop soon after, along with the doll. After the doll and bracelet were removed from the house, James seemed to calm down and never mentioned a little girl or stood around in the dark again. I still don't have an explanation for everything that happened, and sometimes think that it was just a combination of strange behavior from a young autistic guy and the fact that the house was old. But on the other hand, a lot of stuff happened that I can't explain logically. My only regret now is that the doll and bracelet are gone and can't be examined or identified. Maybe it was paranormal? Who knows? But now I work day shifts and do not plan on working night shifts again anytime soon. Night Shift at the Old Hotel. A story written by AviGABS. This is my first Reddit post. It may not be as dramatic or as particularly scary to some people, but I wanted to share this experience anyway. I recently got a job at a hotel downtown from where I live. I have never worked in the hotel industry before, so I had no idea what to expect. The time between applying for the job and being hired was less than 24 hours, which made me nervous. But I had been looking for several months and couldn't find anything, so I thought I'd take a chance. This hotel is about 150 years old and has plenty of character. Behind the front desk, there are places where the wallpaper has torn away, revealing the psychedelic wallpaper for what I can only guess to be the 1970s. We're talking bright pink, neon green, hookah-induced vision type of wallpaper. The walls in the upper floors are painted bright orange and yellow, and the hallways are narrow enough to give off a shining kind of feel to it. But I will elaborate on that later. My manager is a young Chinese man in his mid-20s, only 5 years older than me. The man who owns the building is also Chinese, and literally a walking stereotype. The owner is friendly and kind to the employees, but he's also rich enough that he doesn't really care if the hotel isn't up to par. I learned recently that he also owns one of the more run-down shopping centers downtown, so this might explain the less than 5-star quality of the hotel. Probably about 3.5 star in my honest opinion. Some people describe the place as quaint, unique, full of character, while others describe it as outdated or disappointing. As a history enthusiast, I would agree that the place is full of character, but I also think the owner should be a little more concerned about keeping the place clean. There are lots of problems in this hotel, including mice, broken toilets, falling ceiling tiles, leaks, and other maintenance nightmares. The fancier rooms on the upper floors have real fireplaces in them, so that adds to the risk of fires at the hand of careless guests. Mice are a common problem. I am thankful that guests don't have to see all the dusty traps filled with dead rodents in the basement. But by far the most interesting aspect of the hotel is that it's supposed to be haunted. There are 2 ghosts that have been reported in the building, as well as the adjoining pub next door. Back when the hotel was first built, it had the reputation of being a complete dive. A lady now called Lady Churchill died in the hotel, and her spirit supposedly lingers in the haunted room 49. Guests will occasionally smell her perfume or see her face in the mirror. One of the most frightening stories included someone opening the door only to have Lady Churchill fly at them in a fury. On my first day, when my boss toured me around the hotel, he pointed out the haunted room to me. Lady Churchill has also been spotted at the fireplace in the pub, arguing with her boyfriend, the other resident ghost, Brady. Brady was stabbed to death on a basement stairwell. That stairwell is not in use anymore, as it leads from the street directly into the basement. Instead, it's used to store extra chairs and miscellaneous items. The light is never turned on, which adds more of a creep factor. My shift is the day shift from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Every morning when I come in, I have to check the entire hotel by myself in search of homeless people sleeping in the back stairwell or trying to get through the basement. I am not an intimidating person. I'm a short female, not physically fit, and too friendly for my own good. If I did find someone hiding in the hotel, what was I supposed to do about it? I'm not sure which creeps me out more. The fact that I'm going around looking for people who shouldn't be there, or the idea that I have to walk through dark and silent areas known to be haunted, all by myself. My sweep of the hotel includes all 4 floors of guest rooms, the kitchen, the back stairwell, the basement stairwell, and the basement. I'll give you some context. The back stairwell serves as a fire escape, connecting all the floors together. It goes straight down to street level. It's always cold and echoey in there. And, as I said before, full of dead mice. When I was first told about the haunted stairway, I mistakenly thought they meant the fire escape stairs, as they go down to basement level. The 4 floors for guest rooms in all their overlook hotel glory are shaped like a square horseshoe, which means more than enough blind corners where creepy twins might suddenly appear. Lady Churchill's haunted room is at the end of the hall around one of these blind corners, and yes, I do think about that every time I search the hotel. There is an elevator and an interior stairway, the one guests are supposed to use. Behind the elevator is this old connecting hallway that basically serves no purpose anymore. In the past, it may have been useful, but now it just serves as a secret passageway that goes behind the elevator and comes out on the other end of the horseshoe. This hallway especially needs to be searched for homeless people, drunks, or people having sex. The basement is by far the creepiest part of the hotel. To get there, you can either take the elevator or go through the pub and down the stairs. I prefer to go through the pub because there are some fascinating black and white photos from when the hotel was first built, and I love to look at them. It's also the best place to see the age of the brick foundation. Anyway, the basement is used for storing beer kegs, firewood, planter pots, housekeeping items, and maintenance tools, among other things. It's usually deserted. Now that I know the dark, unused basement stairway is where Brady's spirit is supposed to be, I think I'll try and spend even less time down there. This week is my second week of work, and my boss has put me on the afternoon/evening shift, just so I can get a sense of what it's like in case I ever have to cover anybody in the future. Yesterday was my first late shift, and in that time I learned a whole bunch of things I didn't want to know from the lady I worked with. This woman, let's call her Peggy, has been at the hotel for 14 years. She's seen all there is to see and is well known for her stories. I've listened to some of these stories, and honestly, part of me thinks she's full of it. But the other part is going to cautiously believe her, on the off chance that it's true. Here are some of the things I learned about the hotel in the span of one shift. The man I'm replacing was not actually fired for chronic lateness, as my boss had told me, but instead for sexual harassment. The head of housekeeping, a man I get along with very well, is a friend of his. The day before, Peggy caught a drug addict rooting around the private back office after hours. We looked over the security footage, and he was definitely searching for something. We now keep the office doors locked. There were 2 guests several years ago who stayed at the hotel, and the next day they robbed a jewelry store downtown and fled back to the hotel with everything they had stolen. There was a massive police standoff on the roof, SWAT teams and all. There's a news article about it online. Otherwise, I never would have believed it. The bedrock of the hotel can be found in the boiler room. There's a slight gap that has been filled in on the top right corner that connects directly to the street. One time, Peggy came down to the boiler room to find a man half through the gap, head first, trying to get in because he wanted to know what was down there. That image terrifies me. In the span of that one night shift, an alarm went off in the basement. The police showed up at the pub, and I guess verbally abused the day staff over a non-existent shuttle to the hospital. No, not an ambulance, a shuttle. Taking the bus was beneath him, I suppose. And at my bus stop, after my shift, a man was shooting up in public. My city has a drug epidemic going on right now. My bus took half an hour to arrive, and when I got off at my stop, it was foggy, a silent hill. I felt as though I should be looking around for Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. It is October after all. That's one night shift down. I have another tonight, and one more the day after. If anything interesting happens, I'll keep you folks updated. I mostly just wanted to get this all off my chest. It's amazing how different the hotel is after 3 p.m. Much louder, that's for sure. Thanks to the pub on one side and the bar on the other. Everyone I've gotten to know during my first week of work has already gone home, leaving me with drunks, strangers, and Peggy's crazy stories. One thing's for sure, after 3 nights of this, I'll never complain about getting up early again.